Hi gang, the Sons of Medusa are a fleet-based chapter of some interesting renown in the Imperium of Man. On the surface, they're a technological powerhouse. Derived from the Iron Hands chapter, their Chamber Ferrum maintains powerful war fleets, always eager to assist in the crusades of the Imperium or the explorators of the Mechanicus. But behind all that lurks a dark secret, for the Sons of Medusa are not quite as trusted as their battle record would suggest. The Sons of Medusa are a brutal and uncompromising chapter, their war fleets and forgecraft traversing the Imperium for over 5,000 years, frequently lending the might of their armies to Imperial war efforts across the galaxy. They're a technologically advanced, clinical and efficient chapter who brook no compromise and are masters of armoured warfare, grinding the enemies of the Imperium into dust, aided by phalanxes of fighting vehicles, venerable dreadnoughts and cybernetically enhanced warriors, all clad in the emerald green and black of their three ancient war clans. In every sense, according to their record of engagements, the Sons of Medusa should be a lauded and well-regarded chapter, but in truth, they're considered untrustworthy by many in the Imperium, adherents to a fringe religious sect long since outlawed, who frequently commit their warriors to battle against other Space Marine forces, and whose origin is shrouded in mystery, deliberate obfuscation, and rumours of rebellion. The Sons of Medusa are something of a unique case, because unlike most Space Marine chapters, they were never officially part of any founding. Instead, their origin lies in the wars of the Nova Terra Interregnum in the 35th millennium. The Nova Terra Interregnum was one of a series of disasters and civil wars that racked the Imperium in the 35th and 36th millenniums as the Ecclesiarchy, the relatively new legitimized church of the Imperium, tried to consolidate, or maybe just seize power, resulting in all sorts of political unrest and wars of faith. During the Interregnum, the Council of the planet of Nova Terra refused to follow the orders of the High Lords, taking much of the western Segmentum Pacificus with it and leading to a bitter and long-lasting civil war. But the flames of that war fanned religious crises amongst every department of imperial governance. When the civil unrest reached the Adeptus Mechanicus, it resulted in an upsurge in some esoteric minor tech cults who challenged the accepted dogma of Mars, many of which were put down ruthlessly. But the most influential of these arose on the minor forge world of Moirae. The fringe tech creed of Moirae had been devised by a trio of tech mystics who had been studying minor fluctuations in the Astronomicon, the Emperor's psychic navigational beacon. The tech mystics of Moirae maintained that these minor fluctuations and the patterns they generated were actually a tool of prophecy, a way of divining the future through the light of the Omnissiah. But the prophecies they calculated were apocalyptic. Their readings of the future indicated the eventual downfall of Mars and the merging of the religions of Mars and Terra into one unified faith. In such a time of strife and confusion, these radical theories spread like wildfire throughout the Mechanicus. Though they were decried by the authorities on Mars, believers in the teachings of Moirae could be found on almost every forge world, and soon this Moirae Schism erupted into open warfare within the Adeptus. But the Moirae Schism wasn't confined to the Adeptus Mechanicus. The doctrines of Moirae also found purchase amongst the tech marines of those Space Marine chapters who had particularly strong ties to Mars, especially within the Iron Hands chapter. The Iron Hands had always been close to the Adeptus Mechanicus. From way back in their Legion days, they had a notable predilection for the use of heavy armor and advanced technology on the battlefield, and a respect for the artifice and craftsmanship involved in the manufacture of that war gear. Since the death of their Primarch, Ferrus Manus, early in the Horus Heresy, this respect for technology had grown grown into something of an obsession. Much like the tech priests of Mars, the Astartes of the Iron Hands saw their failure in the heresy as weakness of the flesh, something that might be purged by greater and greater devotion to cybernetic augmentation. This obsession with weakness had also resulted in a unique chapter structure. The Iron Hands were split down into rival clan companies that roamed the surface of their homeworld, Medusa, in vast convoys, frequently coming into minor conflict with each other, something the chapter saw as a way of building strength, but which made them particularly vulnerable to this new creed. Championed by the Iron Father Cetol Solex, individual converts to the doctrines of Moirae could be found in every clan, but Clan Borgos, the Iron Hand's 7th company, saw almost a complete conversion. In an attempt to spread their dogma, they attacked their rival Clan Dorvok, attempting to seize Clan Dorvok's gene seed banks and enforce conversion to their creed, and they were only stopped by the intervention of a third clan, Clan Raukan. Borgos also deployed their forces in the Battle of Kamjada, where they fought in support of the Moiraean Mechanicus against loyalist forces that included Clan Raukan. With 3 clans of the chapter in open war, all seeing themselves as the true loyalists, the Great Clan Council of the Iron Hands, fearing censure by the Inquisition if this was to ever get out, acted. Their judgment was typically straightforward. The Moiraean Iron Hands, comprising almost a third of the chapter, were exiled from Medusa, bound never to raise their hands against their parent chapter again. Led by Solex, they departed the homeworld in command of a small fleet, where they were eventually joined by similar exiles from other Iron Hands successor chapters, with the notable exception of the Red Talons, who just killed all their Moiraeans, and the small fleet set off into the void. Over time, the fires of Moirae were forgotten. Moirae itself was destroyed by a Martian retribution fleet, and the Council of Nova Terra forcibly brought back into the fold, and the Imperium, after an all too brief period of unity, became embroiled in its next political crisis, the Age of Apostasy. But the exiled Iron Hands fought on, outliving the schism that birthed them. Divided into 3 new clan companies, they directed themselves against targets that threatened the Imperium, rebuilt their stores and forges with captured and requisitioned war gear, submitted their gene seed for regular tithe examination just like any other Astartes force, and grew their numbers. By the time of the Age of Redemption, when the Imperium sought to rebuild and strengthen its defences in the wake of 2 millennia of discord, the exiled Iron Hands were operating at full chapter strength, and the Imperium was in dire need of new chapters. Multiple new foundings had been commissioned already by the High Lords, and in their desperation to save whatever they could from the anarchy of the previous millennia, the actions of the Iron Hands exiles came under scrutiny. The renegade Iron Hands were carefully judged, but eventually they were found to be free of taint or corruption, and by an almost unique edict, the exiled Iron Hands were officially reclassified as a new successor chapter, the Sons of Medusa. And the first action of that chapter was appropriate. They were immediately ordered to take part in the Great Cull, wiping out those elements of the Imperium who had been judged a little less favourably. Since then, the Sons of Medusa have been tireless crusaders and defenders of the Imperium, taking to their new legitimacy with a fierce zeal, as if they wished to escape the taint of the renegade and prove themselves to the many other chapters who still view them with a level of distrust. In defiance of that, their war fleets have been eager to attach themselves to Imperial crusades, or to respond to calls for aid from far-flung corners of the Imperium, no matter how desperate the odds. Because of their origin and their strange genesis, the Sons of Medusa have a unique structure that mixes the regulations of the Codex Astartes with the clan-based organisation of their parent chapter. The chapter is divided at the highest level into 3 war clans, the Lachesis, the Moire, and the Atropos, each of which contain an equal third of the chapter strength and which maintains its own war fleet. Each war clan is led by an Iron Thane and has its own set of markings and honours colours and its own variation on the chapter colours. The Sons of Medusa are nominally clad in emerald green battleplate with black, white and silver details, their chapter symbol, the skull in an 8-pointed starburst, but this scheme varies across the clans. The Atropos armour tends towards green and black, while the Lachesis make more use of the silver steel elements. All three clans make use of the distinctive cogwheel style markings and symbols that are common to many Iron Hand successors. Each of these war clans is then subdivided into 3 companies, one battle company and one tactical company, organised in the standard forms specified by the Codex Astartes, and then one support company that houses a mix of Devastator, Assault and Veteran squad loadouts. Rather than a dedicated scout company, each war clan maintains its own body of recruits and initiates. The 3 Iron Thanes govern the chapter together. There's been no single chapter master since the passing of Solex millennia ago. Below them sit the captains of each company and their company chaplains, as well as a large and well-regarded body of venerable dreadnoughts known as Ancients, whose experience can be called on by the Thanes for advice. Outside the structure of the 3 clans is the Chamber Ferrum, the Brotherhood of Tech Marines, who have significantly more power than in most other chapters. As well as directing the flow of war materiel between the 3 fleets, the Chamber Ferrum is designed to cement unity across the chapter, its Tech Marines moving between the fleets and directing the efforts of the whole. For this reason, despite this broken down structure, the chapter displays a high degree of unity and coherence, its actions considered efficient and well coordinated. The strength of the Chamber Ferrum can be seen throughout the Sons of Medusa. The chapter's forged ships and armories are particularly large. Its war gear is of the highest level of sophistication possible. It's even rumoured that they retain the ability to construct new dreadnought chassis. Its pool of weapons and vehicles is also incredibly diverse, which is not just a product of the adaptability of their forges, but also of their choice of targets. For the Sons of Medusa are well known as a chapter of scavengers. Their birth as exiles led their Chamber Ferrum to become experts in the salvage and repair of Adeptus Astartes war gear. Their initial actions in the Great Cull saw them stripping renegade or ill-favoured chapters of their weapons and equipment, and they still take any opportunity to aggressively add to their stockpiles. Their tech priests are even privy to the secret rites of Malatech exorcism, allowing them to harvest equipment from sources other chapters might consider damnably heretical. These practices have given them a poor reputation as carrion feeders. Many believe that their desire for new technology is the underlying motive that influences the chapter's choice of war zone, and their chapter ferrum are always eager to commit the chapter to battle against censured and renegade Adeptus Astartes in the hope of increasing their own strength in the aftermath. And of course, the character of the chapter is hardly one that helps that reputation. The Astartes of the Sons of Medusa are notoriously harsh and pragmatic, totally intolerant of any form of weakness in others or in themselves. In battle, they seem almost emotionless, like cold and efficient automatons, but this facade can be broken by failure or any other perceived slight to their honour. To the Sons of Medusa, these are all things to be avenged. Anything else would be weakness. As with the Iron Hands, this obsession with strength and reliance on technology has led to a high level of cybernetic replacement amongst the chapter's battle brothers. In an attempt to escape the weakness of the flesh, augmetic rebuild is common, with the longest-lived Astartes being as much metal as flesh. Within the chapter, when a marine replaces a biological component with a gleaming mechanical one, it's common to encase the removed limb or organ in adamantium to preserve it against decay, and then to carry those into battle. These reliquaries of spite remind the battle brothers of the chapter of the weakness of their flesh and stoke their hatred of infirmity. The Sons of Medusa have continued to crusade in the same manner as their founding for over 5 millennia, often attached to either sympathetic Mechanicus explorator fleets or Imperial Crusade armies, though their character can make them an aloof and mysterious ally. It's unclear if their beliefs still align with the original Moiraean teachings. Over the thousands of years since the destruction of Moirae, the chapter's traditions have slowly shifted as the divinations of Moirae came into alignment with the chapter cult of Ferrus Manus. So it's possible that what remains of the Moirae sect within the chapter is actually significantly different from its origins. Regardless, there are still plenty within the wider Adeptus Mechanicus and the Imperium as a whole who regard them with some level of suspicion, and while their fleets have seen action all over the galaxy, they've also remained particularly active within the Segmentum Pacificus, where the Nova Terra Interregnum and the Moire Schism were birthed. One of their largest recent deployments was during the massive Belwrath Crusade of M38 into the Lunar Rifts in the northwest of the Segmentum. The Rifts were unexplored territory, untouched by humanity since before Old Night, and the chapter quickly found itself engaged against renegade outposts of humanity, void pirates, and never-before-seen Xenos species. The most powerful of those were named the Hellgramites by the Imperials. Many-legged monsters who rode into battle on the backs of biomechanical constructs and used warp-infused weapons, including surrounding their planets in warp fire as a means of defense. After 50 years of slow progress, the Crusade had started to falter, but the Sons of Medusa, characteristically, would not countenance defeat and developed a technological solution. The Chamber Ferrum, along with the Adeptus Mechanicus Explorator Magi that accompanied the fleet, modified the warp drives of their ships to repel the flaming barriers, and the entire chapter conducted a lightning assault on the Hellgramites' homeworld of Wormgyre. Pushing through the flaming barriers, the chapter conducted a full orbital assault, smashing through the black coral from which the Xenos cities were constructed and laying low their temples to the dark gods. The Sons of Medusa tore through the defenders without pause, coldly and efficiently blasting through waves of Xenos beasts and warrior constructs, switching to combat blades when their ammo ran out, and then to their fists when their blades dulled or broke. When half the planet was reduced to rubble, they returned to orbit. The destruction of Wormgyre was the turning point in the Belwrath Crusade. Within a few years, the rifts fell, and within a century, they were a thriving Imperial sector. The Sons of Medusa still maintain contacts within the Mechanicus of the sector to this day, and occasionally use the planets of the rifts as a source of new recruits. And then in M39, the chapter finally established something of a base in the abandoned asteroid mines of the Tylus system, constructing refit yards, armories, and gene seed storage facilities to better resupply their fleets. And while Tylus does seem like the perfect place to house a fleet-based chapter, it's also but a day's journey under warp from the ruins of Moirae itself. In 907 M41, the chapter sent forces to the Badab sector. The secessionist chapters, under the leadership of Lufthuron of the Astral Claws, and after years of skirmishes on the borders of the Maelstrom Zone, had finally been judged by the Inquisition and declared heretical, and the call had been put out for Space Marine chapters to reinforce the Imperium in its time of need. The Sons of Medusa, ever eager to prove themselves against renegade Astartes, arrived in force. The entire might of the Atropos war clan, with elements of the two others, comprising between 500 and 600 Astartes, aboard 2 strike cruisers, 2 forge vessels, a battle barge, and a slew of escorts, all under the command of Iron Thane Valand Cal of the Atropos. He was a hulking figure of significant cybernetic augmentation. Even his remaining biological systems were shot through with auto-sanguinary upgrades. Cal was a cold and emotionless war leader who, if rumours were to be believed, was a fanatical believer in the teachings of Moirae. The stated aim of the chapter upon arrival in the zone was the righteous punishment of the Astral Claws who had sinned against the Imperium, and definitely not the theft of all their stuff. Technically, Cal and his forces were under the command of the overall Magister Militum, Karab Kuln of the Red Scorpions. Kuln had fought alongside the Sons of Medusa before, and wisely deployed them to their own battlefields where Cal would be in command. Early in the war, they purged the atomic wasteland of Signax, fighting against many of the secessionist chapters, and the chapter then devoted significant resources to the subjugation of the rebel world of Galen IV under Iron Thane Mazos Duel. Galen had switched sides multiple times already in the campaign, but it was a linchpin world with massive production facilities. The only stipulation the chapter was under was to preserve the technological infrastructure of the world for the loyalist cause, and the Sons of Medusa responded to this in a typically brutal manner. The chapter took up position above the capital conurbation of Galen, Old City, and launched a precise series of orbital bombardments, killing thousands to clear 3 landing zones on the dense outskirts of the city. 3 companies then launched a daring orbital assault, deploying armor and artillery and moving from the landing zones into the city, slaughtering everything they found. Within 56 hours of commencing the action, Old City was a burning ruin, its population all but wiped out, and the remainder of the planet quickly capitulated. Overseen by the Sons of Medusa, the flattened remains of Old City were turned into a processing station for the planet's remaining population, now indentured into a lifetime of penal servitude under the watchful eye of the Inquisition. The chapter suffered some losses during the latter part of the campaign. Their strike cruiser Warspite was destroyed by the Executioners in 9/11, and this caused the Sons of Medusa to seek revenge even after the Executioners had turned on their former allies in the Astral Claws and negotiated an exit from the conflict. It was only intervention by the Salamanders chapter that stayed their hand. The Sons of Medusa were also instrumental in the final siege of the Badab system, where they were tasked alongside the Exorcists with seizing the orbital fortress of Sentinel-Sigma, the center of the ring of steel that surrounded Badab Primaris. Valand Cal and his Atropos Terminators fought through a storm of fire in a colossal boarding assault, eventually reaching the engine vaults of the Star Fortress and severing its power supply, allowing the main assault on the planet to begin. In the years following Badab, the Sons of Medusa continued to reinforce and increase their power, no doubt helped by the wealth of Astartes technology that was available for salvage after the fall of Badab. Soon after the 13th Black Crusade, a few decades later, as the Imperium found itself embattled on all fronts, the chapter were drawn into the defense of the Stygian sector, where they, along with many other Iron Hand successors, fought alongside the parent chapter during the Second Relief of Mordian. The original Stygian Crusade, sent to relieve the sector against invasion by the demonic forces of chaos, had stalled. The only world in the sector that mounted any sort of coherent defense was Mordian, and though the Crusade had managed to break the initial siege of the planet with the help of the Eldar craft world Ulthwé, their forces were beginning to be overwhelmed as the planets of the sector started to mutate under the influence of the war. On the advisement of the Seers of Ulthwé, the Crusade cut its losses and prepared to retreat, but to many in the Crusade, including the Sons of Medusa, retreat, especially on the advisement of doomsaying Xenos, was unthinkable, and the chapter fought alongside the Iron Hands in what was dubbed the Iron Crusade, reinforcing Mordian, purging the Night Lord's warbands who terrorized it, and then holding it against all odds. Soon after this, despite the mistrust of the Imperium at large, they were reinforced by a torchbearer fleet of the Indomitus Crusade, who fought alongside the Lachesis war clan against the orcs of the Dravis cluster, and slowly the technology required to create Primaris Space Marines spread through the chapter. Notably, Valand Cal and his fellow Badab veteran and eventual successor, Wormgyre, both crossed the Rubicon Primaris and continued to lead Clan Atropos well into the era of Indomitus. And then later still, the Sons of Medusa fought alongside the Mordian Iron Guard again during the assault on Damhal, working with the Death Watch to reclaim the Shrine World from Hrud invasion, a battle that involved the loss of over 20 Death Watch dreadnoughts, which I'm sure the Sons of Medusa were totally up for helping out with. The Sons of Medusa are another one of those Badab War chapters that look pretty straightforward on the surface, but are actually pretty unique. Like many of the Badab chapters, they were originally invented as part of the very first Badab War article in the late 80s, with their colour scheme and symbol illustrated here by Gary Chalk. Of course, there's no mention of the Iron Hands, and their symbol is a bit more on the nose. It's an actual Medusa's head, but by the time of the 2010 Badab War books, which is when they finally got some backstory, Medusa had been firmly established as the home world of the Iron Hands, so making them an Iron Hand successor was a simple decision to make. But Alan Bligh, when he was writing those books, went way further. Lots of the Badab War chapters have origin stories that fill in various bits of Imperial history, or tie together some lost thread. And those weird middle 30s millenniums were always a bit sparse in terms of lore. So linking the chapter to this great period of unrest not only fills in a bit of backstory, there's a few other Badab chapters that do the same, but it also gives them this sort of religious flavour that's appreciably different from being just another Iron Hand successor. And then throughout the Badab War, there's this idea that many of the loyalist chapters who respond are ones who stand to gain personally from pledging their service, either avenging some ancient slight or actually stealing planets and resources. So making them dubious, untrustworthy scavengers is a nice way of re-skinning the famous Iron Hand's pragmatism. And then, like many Badab chapters, they've been built with plenty of options for painting schemes. Not only the whole 3-clan thing with all their variants, but also some classic Badab camo schemes and alternate night patterns for your scout squads and infiltrators. The 1989 season's classic desert camo pattern contrasts well with the bright green of the rest of your army. So that's the Sons of Medusa. They're still Iron Hand successors, just ones where all the Iron Hand's traits were twisted in a slightly different direction. Thanks for watching. And if you'd like more about the chapters of the Badab War, there should be a little video popping up there to the right. And if you'd like to support the channel, you can do that in all the normal ways. Like and subscribe here, or join YouTube memberships or Patreon for access to early videos and chances to join in on the channel. See ya!